Fáilte go club leabhar Eilís Dillon mar cuid mór de léamh mór na Gaillimhe. You're very welcome to week 3 of the Eilís Dillon Book Club as part of Galway's Great Read. I'm just looking to see who we might have joining us new this week. I think I see familiar faces. Yes, I think I'm just going to check and see if we have any newcomers who I might ask to just introduce yourselves, please. I see Muireann there. Hi Muireann, could I just ask you to all please turn on your camera?
Video's wonky at the moment, I'm afraid.
Sorry?
I was just saying video's wonky at the moment, I'm afraid.
Is it? Oh, okay, no problem. Will you just tell us your name and where you're joining us from, Muireann?
Muireann O'Canada, hi, I'm a few from Galway, from NUI Galway there.
Oh, okay, very good. And do you familiar with Eilís Dillon's work? Would you know, or are you curious to learn more?
Both, as it were. I've read a few of hers, but not as much as I'd have liked. So.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome aboard. It's great to have you. And if you get to put on the camera, we'd love to see your face, because we're just trying to, I'm requesting that everyone keeps the cameras on so we can keep that sense of community in this cyber delivery. And then maybe if you could mute your mics until you're speaking, that would be great, just to prevent any background noise. And oh, we've quite a few now. That's great to see you all. There's Bridget again and Kevin. Hi, folks, and Patsy. That's lovely. Okay, so last week we've been exploring some of the lovely historical and interesting cultural aspects of the bitter glass, and some of the more fraught aspects too. We discussed references to the Irish Civil War as well as aspects of the folk tradition. And we also looked at the novel in the context of Dillon's overall historical fiction output. It was the first of 6 such novels. And it was a great pleasure to chat with expert Anne-Marie Heron, who reminded us that the author was both brave and perhaps a little bit naive as well to publish The Bitter Glass when she did in 1958, when the topic of the Civil War was still somewhat fraught. So now that we're into our 3rd week, I'm just going to recap and show you, can you see the flyer there, the schedule of for our book club? So we started by looking at the world that Dillon creates in the first few chapters of The Bitter Glass, and we spoke to Elaine and Cormac in week 1. Last week, as I said, we spoke to Anne-Marie Heron. And this week we're going to broaden it out a little bit, because any self-respecting Eilís Dillon book club could not omit to note the author's special contribution to the field of Irish children's literature. And while it's true to say that her fiction for adults has been somewhat neglected, and we'll be looking at this, I suppose, in greater depth next week and wondering why that is the case. It's certainly true to say that she has been especially recognised within the field of children's literature. Critical books, articles, essays and survey studies such as Treasure Island acknowledge her pioneering achievements in this field. So tonight we're going to cast the net a little bit wider and expand the conversation and look at her children's fiction. And then next week in our final session, and I'm hoping most of us will we'll be at an advanced stage in the book by this week, and many of us will have completed the book, of course. And so in our final session, we'll be able to look in a comparative way at the book as a product of its time, in its place, in its context. And we'll also look in a comparative way at, you know, the pool of Irish writers at that time, and who else was writing. And yeah, so I'll be talking to Dr. Maureen O'Connor next week, and we'll do a little recap as well on what we've been discussing. So I'm delighted, as I said, that we will be, you know, talking about her contribution to children's literature. Of course, the annual Eilís Dillon Award for a first children's book is named in her honour, noting her particular contributions to the field of children's literature. And a book that I've been mentioning over the past couple of weeks, The Seals, is now reissued and available to read on Kindle. I'll just share the cover there. There's a lovely cover. So that is, it's dealing with a similar time period, and I think it'll be interesting to look at the contrasts and similarities between this book and The Bitter Glass. Now, don't fret, there's no onus on anyone to have read this book or to read it, but if you're curious and you'd like to, it is available on Kindle. It's The Seals by Eilís Dillon, and there are Galway hookers on the cover, the russet sails of the Galway hooker. So I'm delighted to tell you that Siobhán Morrissey, who is a scholar, an Eilís Dillon scholar, and is completing her PhD at NUI Galway on children's literature and looking at Enid Blyton and Eilís Dillon, will be joining us later on to talk about The Seals and to talk about her overall output for children. So it would be wonderful if you do get a chance to look at The Seals, but again, no pressure and no worries if you don't. So to set the tone for this evening, I'd like to read a short paragraph from The Bitter Glass from chapter 7. It's a very interesting piece of exposition about what's going on in Nora Macaulay's mind, and of course she's the youngest of the Macaulay daughters, and so the author is talking about her individuation from childhood to adulthood and giving us an insight into her own profound respect for children and for their sense of fairness. So I'm going to share page 68, and you can read this little section along with me. It's just a short paragraph. Now, so it's just that section at the bottom there, and again she's talking about Nora, who's becoming a young adult. And so she says, to a child, a hunched back, a scaly complexion, a twisted face means no more than that a person can be easily identified. A child sees beyond all barriers of good and bad looks, right into the soul, and finds kindness and strength, or ill humour and self-absorption, on which he can easily base his affection or dislike. And she's talking about, she's angry with herself for caring what Coleman thinks of her. So I just think that's an interesting passage, and quite a revealing one, which tells us about Eilís Dillon's appreciation of children's fair-mindedness. And I think it's a nice opening tone to set for this evening. So before we branch out to discuss Dillon's output for children, her children's fiction, we'll continue our conversations about The Bitter Glass. And at this stage, I suppose many of us have navigated through it, and or we're at an advanced stage, so there mightn't be too many spoilers this week. So I'm going to pose 3 open questions now, again, to give you a chance to sum up your experience of the book. And I'll share those questions with you now. And when I stop sharing the questions, I'll assign you again into the smaller groups. And we'll chat for, again, about 10 to 12 minutes. And then I will give you 2 minutes notice before I bring you back, and then we'll share some of our thoughts and feedback what we've been discussing. Hello everyone, welcome back. It was lovely to be a fly on the wall there and to hear some of the engaging discussions, and just to get a sense of the range of what you were talking about and your interests. And could I ask maybe someone from room 1 to share some of the thoughts? What characters did you all favour? And so room 1 we had Anne, Aoife, Eileen, Jo and Kay. Anyone from room?
We're discussing. Will I talk here?
Thanks, Kay. That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we were saying how we like the character of Ruth. Well, the two of the Anne and I think and Eileen like the character of Ruth, and that she changed and grew at the end, and the point of view. Who would you choose? And Aoife and myself were interested in Coleman. That. We thought he could have, he would have told us a different story maybe, and we would have liked to have got his detail. And then I'm not sure what else was said now, but so that was
There's a funny line early on in the book about was it Pat thought that if you know that he was that Coleman was so good looking that a crooked nose might have saved his soul, I think is the line. I thought that was very good. Yeah, that it might have saved his soul for him. Yes.
And we were talking about the doctor as well, and we were so surprised that he was so violent and everything. We thought that, like Eve was saying, that it was like a cliffhanger, that she has so many of those in the book that, you know, you're not expecting it and everything, you know. So,
yes.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Very undesirable character, the doctor. So room 2, we had Anne-Marie, Bridget, Connie, Monica and Muireann in room 2. What perspectives were you particularly interested in, and what kind of? Let's talk about what we liked and didn't like, perhaps. What were your thoughts on that? Anyone like to speak? Can I put someone under pressure, like Jack Charlton? Connie, would you? I'm going to randomly ask someone here to, or Monica, would you like to respond?
I wouldn't be the best to speak about it, but the character of the doctor came up very strongly, and the issues around, you know, his inebriation and etc. etc. So that was one of the things we were talking about. There's somebody in the room, I can't remember whose name, had a lot to say about it. So maybe they'd pick that up.
Yes, Bridget. Yes.
Bridget.
Yes. Bridget, can you unmute there? I think you're on mute. Oh, that's better. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I suppose I realised that I kind of tune into the social issues that she picks up on, but I was just saying that the drunk doctor was very much part of the landscape in Ireland, and I was amazed that she had, right into the 80s, and certainly in 1958. So what she's describing was a lived experience for people in communities where you're stuck with the one doctor. Now, I was, the morphine was new to me, but, you know, I mean, that would have been much more hidden. But I mean, people were delivering babies drunk. They were, I could name them. They were doing operations drunk. This was the sort of thing that was going on. And if you were a woman, stuck away and you didn't have any choice, you were stuck. And this is what's happened in this situation. He's as good as they have for that baby at that point. It was extraordinary to me for her to name it in 1958. It is.
It's another brave aspect of the book, isn't it? That she's doing that. She's highlighting the rural disadvantages, you know, that exist, and the inequities for people living in rural parts of Ireland. No, that's a very good point. Thanks, Bridget, for that. And just finally, to come to room 3, we had Cecily, Kevin, Patsy, and Siobhán. Maybe someone could share there what you liked best and least about the book. Maybe would somebody like to?
Well,
Kevin, I think you're muted there as well.
A very good range. Would somebody else like to talk? Patsy? A very good range anyhow. Most people liked Nora very much. She was direct.
Yes.
They loved Nora. And as for, I don't think we got down to another point of view.
Yes.
But I thought Mrs. Lynch, when she said that Coleman was a grouser, I thought that was very good. It just got him. I thought I'd like to get more from her. Yes,
a lot of wisdom there, and it's nice to see the kind of the older kind of matriarch, one could say, the older maternal figure passing on the wisdom to the younger woman as well. That was a lovely element in the book, I thought, and helping her to grow.
Another thing that I thought very good, that the Dublin middle-class women were helpless, really, because the island women were so strong, and they plucked hens and plucked ducks and killed pigs. And the middle-class women just were crying and wailing.
That's very true, Cecily. They kind of, they come with I suppose, a degree of prejudice, and by the summer all of those prejudices have eroded, haven't they, or they've dissipated to a certain extent, and they have a newfound admiration for the local people.
Yeah.
You know, they've got the score of eggs from Hannah Frank, they've got the wisdom from old Mrs. Lynch, and they've just, they appreciate them with a new, I suppose, through a new perspective, really. Well, that's lovely to hear that feedback, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. We're now going to come on to our special guest, and I'm delighted that we have Siobhán with us this evening. Siobhán Morrissey is a final year PhD student in NUI Galway. She completed an MPhil in popular literature at Trinity College, where she began researching children's literature and the British author Enid Blyton. Siobhán's PhD thesis is a study of Enid Blyton's wartime fiction with a focus on Blyton's magazine, Sunny Stories for Little Folks. Siobhán, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for joining us. Now, before we get into the thick of the conversation, I think you have a few images that you'd like to share of the book covers of the massive swathe of books for children that about almost 40, isn't it, of her titles?
Almost, over 30 of them. It's saying that I can't share my screen, so
okay,
I think you might have to share.
Okay, that's
sorry now.
No problem. I'm going to open it here now, and hopefully I will be able to do that. Now, there we go. Is that visible yet? No. Is that
not
no?
Yet. You can only kind of see the very top of it.
If I click, if I play from start, that should. Now.
Yeah.
So, okay. Great.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Emily. So as you probably know, Dillon, the majority of Dillon's writing was for children and young adults, and she wrote over 30 books for children and young adults and teenagers, beginning with On Quill Vio, which you'll see down on the bottom left-hand corner in 1948, and then ending with Children of Bach in 1992. And I think even with these two books, you can see the variety of Dillon's writing in terms of the age of readership, in terms of themes and in content. On Quill Vio was for very young children, and because it's written as Gaeilge, you know, it would be just for readers in Ireland. And then Children of Bach is more for teenagers, for older readers, and it tells the story of a Jewish family fleeing their Hungarian home after their parents are taken by Nazis. Dillon, her earliest writing comprised of books written in both English and Irish. I think the screen might have disappeared there.
Sorry,
That's okay.
I was trying to move the slide actually. Wait till I see if I can get. I was trying to. Were you able to see the second slide at all? Did that? It might be. I think that's it now. I can see. Okay, current slide. From current slide now. It will see. I'll just go back to. No.
Sure, I'll keep going anyway.
Can you see that there now? So, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So her earliest writing was books for young children in Irish, and then Midsummer Magic, which she published in 1950, was her first published book in English. And the book tells the story of a young Irish boy, Brian, and his magic soda cake, which grants Brian the power to make animals talk. So in this first slide here, you'll see the books that she wrote for very young readers. So these would have been for, under 8 years of age. And then in the second slide, you can see books for children aged between like 8 and 12, and A Family of Foxes on the top row. That would have been, one of her most famous books as well. And then in the third slide, perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I should have said. So in the third slide, these are the books that she published for teenagers and young adults. And I think you can see, even from the titles of the books and the cover illustrations, how much the islands and the sea feature in her writing for teenagers, for children, and also for adults, because we see this in The Bitter Glass and in The Seals, which is the book that I'll be talking about.
Yes, indeed, the trope of the island is very strong. And as you say, I mean, in the Bitter Glass, one doesn't think of an island automatically, but they need to go back in on the hooker back into Galway to get the doctor back. So it is that sense of an island, that isolation feeling. Yeah. We'll come on. We might talk a bit more about that trope of the island shortly now. So I'm going to stop the share unless you want to pinpoint anything else there on those. I think I've got the hang of it now. Is there anything else? Will I stop the share there? Siobhán, will I come back to?
Yeah,
okay.
That's perfect. Or if people want to watch the slides or anything. Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose looking at both the Bitter Glass and the Seals, which have quite a bit of common ground in terms of theme and historical context, how does the portrayal of war and of the enemy differ in the two books, do you think? How does she handle conflict and war in her books for children? Do you think she tries to gloss over things or make them a little bit more palatable, or?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in the tone of the books, and yeah, as you say, like there are certainly shared themes between the Bitter Glass and the Seals, and the historical context is very similar as well. They're set within 2 years of each other. Yes. I think in the Bitter Glass, and people were kind of saying this last week as well, there's a sense of like weariness about the war. The characters feel as though this war is never ending, and they escape Dublin in order to kind of like temporarily escape the turmoil that's happening in the city, and they try to get away from it. And then in the Seals, it's the opposite. The young characters, the young boys and the elderly grandfather, they're dying to be part of the war. They're dying to get involved. And the grandfather feels as though he has missed out on his opportunity when he was part of the Fenians in Boston. And yes, this is now his chance to kind of like to prove himself and to contribute in some way to the Irish side.
Yes, yeah.
I think, oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, I totally agree with you. I found it remarkable, the tone, the change in tone, going from, I suppose, the Bitter Glass, which is, we see the interior monologues, and we see the thoughts running through their heads, and we also get a strong anti-war, anti-militaristic message. And then to move to the Seals, published in 1969, isn't that correct? 1968, 1969, 1968. Yeah. So 10 years after the Bitter Glass, and there's a sense of kind of the mystique of, or the intrigue of war, which is, I thought that was, and again, as you say, plot-driven, less about the characters' inner thoughts and more about the plot. Exactly. And yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, and that idea of the war as an adventure is very prominent in this book, and war as an opportunity for the young boys to grow and to kind of like form a friendship through war, because they're united against a kind of a common enemy, whereas there's a lot more nuance in the Bitter Glass about who the enemy is. They're just in the midst of this conflict. And yes, then with Children of Bach, which is also about the Second World War, I think Dillon, she allows the child reader to bring their own knowledge of the war and the Holocaust and the concentration camps to the book. So she doesn't kind of like give too much detail that might be, too much information to the reader. Too harrowing. Too young. Yeah. So she relies on the child reader's own information and knowledge about that time in history.
Okay, and of course the theme of reconciliation looms large in Eilís Dillon's books. There's a sense of the romantic nationalism, but there's also a sense of progress through dialogue and through discussion, and both sides talking out their differences rather than going the military route. How does she handle the theme of reconciliation in the Seals?
So I think actually, it's a very interesting question, and reconciliation is probably the main theme of the book. It is a boys' adventure story, but it's the main point of the book is that the Linsky family, who are one of the families on the island, will reconcile and be accepted by the rest of the island, because their great-grandfather, the Linsky great-grandfather, was a kind of a traitor to the Irish side, and he informed. So the younger generation of the Linsky family are still ostracized. So Pat, the main protagonist of the book, he kind of sees past the community's opinions of the family, and he tries to reconcile and make amends with the youngest member of the Linsky family, Jerry.
Mm-hmm. So again, harking back to that quote earlier about a child seeing through past the scaly complexion or the hunchback, that they see into the soul. So there's that theme there again of you know, getting over the child seeing beyond the informer and the family and giving someone a chance. And yeah, interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was just going to try and share just that page that sets the tone in the book early on in the seals, and I'll just see if I can do that now very briefly. Let me see now. So again, so there we have a bit of narrative summary there. The year was 1920, and throughout the country a terrible struggle was raging. During 700 years, Ireland had fought for independence from English rule. Now success was only 2 years away, but the tired and dispirited people did not know it. Naturally, they thought that this was going to be just another link in the chain of disasters that had afflicted their country for so long. The lost battles of Kinsale and Aughrim, the savage campaigns of Cromwell and Marlborough, the crushed uprisings of 1798 and 1916, with dozens of minor incidents, each of which should have driven the people further into depressed slavery. But for some reason, they had never been enslaved. There was always a leader, and there were always songs of hope to light up their spirits again and to start the usual pattern of plot and rising and death and defeat. Now, it's quite heavy, you know, for a children's book, that particular exposition there, in I suppose in particular, and then the rest of it is quite compelling. It's a page turner. Mm-hmm. But I just thought I'd share that just to give a little taster, and there are lovely illustrations throughout the book as well in that edition. So I suppose moving on then to her children's books more broadly, and I suppose to her own, the Barna of her childhood, which she talks about in this lovely book that we were looking at again last week, Inside Ireland. You know, she shares, it's a wonderful companion to her work. She talks about the Barna of her childhood. How important do you think were her childhood experiences to the development of her writing for children?
Yeah, I think her own childhood experiences, they certainly strongly influenced her writing. And I think in the memoir she talks about how the house in Barna, that its doors were always open, and how her mother would always have a soda cake baked on the table for school children who would pass by. Yes. So the kindness and the hospitality of Irish women, it's a consistent theme throughout her writing. And in the seals it takes on this kind of added extra element, because an open door and a kind, hospitable woman is actually a sign of safety for the soldiers who are passing by. So if a woman came out to greet the soldiers, it meant that, you know, this was a safe place for them to rest. So it kind of becomes like a symbol of support and alliance.
Yes, indeed. The sense of community is a redemptive quality. She keeps, I suppose, reminding us of that in the books. And we saw with the quote earlier some of the qualities that Dillon prized in children. And she's known, especially in her island adventure stories, for respecting children's inner resourcefulness and not condescending to them in any way. What are some of the values, do you think, that she hoped to nurture in her young readers, I suppose with a view to, you know, nurturing young citizens of the new young independent Ireland?
Yeah, I think in the seals and in the Lost Island, you see an emphasis on bravery and on kind of like a willingness or an eagerness to participate, to help. But I think one of the main values that she reinforces is kind of independence of thought as well, and not just going along with the society or with the characters' own community ideas and with their beliefs, but in questioning that, and not just questioning it for the sake of being rebellious, but because they see a certain injustice and they try to make amends. So I think even you know, going back to the bitter glass, you see with Sarah, she's kind of questioning Hannah Frank's attitude to the pregnant bride, Mary, and she sees an injustice there. She sees there's cruelty in the way Hannah is talking about Mary, and you see this then with Pat in the seals, how he goes against his own island community's attitude towards the Linsky family, and he wants to make amends. So I think independence of thought is probably one of the main values.
Making up your mind for yourself and judging people and how they treat you, and I suppose not going with, not following the crowd slavishly.
Exactly.
That's great, yes. Now I'm very struck in particular in the seals that there's a scene in chapter 8 where Mrs. Curran is kind of mustering all her wits, and she has to outwit the black and tans, you know, and she's very courageous. And I just wondered, is there a sense in which Dillon, you know, we know from the Inside Ireland about her deep fear of the night raids since, you know, witnessing her mother being taken away at a young age, but also her mother did stand up to the black and tans, and I might be able to just share that page that we looked at last week again now, just that section, just where she says, my father was on the run. It's the second paragraph there, a familiar expression to me as a child. And I'll just skip on a few lines down. So then had been compelled by a party of black and tans to lead them out into the garden where my mother was, so that they could kill her. My mother argued them out of their intention then, saying that it would be objected to in England if they were to shoot down a young woman in the presence of her child. So, you know, she had to summon her wits to stand up to the black and tans, as does Mrs. Curran in the seals. And I'm just wondering, is there a sense that Dillon might have been working out and working through some of those issues from her own childhood in the book, and was kind of compelled to address them in some way in that story?
I think so. I think definitely with the scene with Mrs. Curran, which is extremely tense, and I think what Dillon shows is that the woman, even though she's very vulnerable, she's by herself in the house, but she's, through her intelligence and through her quick thinking, she's able to gain control of the situation, and she's able to actually trick the black and tan soldiers, and she kind of she changes the lyrics of an Irish song to alert the two boys to what's happening, and to tell them, you know, to go to the next village, that, you know, the black and tans have captured one of the Irish soldiers, and all of this is done in such an elegant and such a like an intelligent way,
yes,
and very quickly as well. It just seems seamless, and I think this might have been a way to kind of recreate the situation, but with the woman taking charge of the situation.
Yes, indeed, and that brings me on nicely to the next question I was going to ask you. Just how does traditional folklore influence the story? We see, you know, that there's a love of songs and ballads running through Dillon's books, and she likes to give them prominence so that she's passing on her own love of Irish tradition and culture. How, for example, in the seals, how does folklore play a part there?
I think it's one of the main elements of the book. Even the seals, the title, it's taken from this the idea of the Irish myth of Selkies, and the Keneally family, the main family in the book, they are thought to have been descended from seals, and this allows them to sail without any worry, because they know that they will never drown. So this Irish myth, it's actually like it encourages Pat to embark on this very dangerous, very risky adventure, because he has this belief that the seals will protect him, and they do. So, and then there's also mention of, you know, pukas and ghosts and banshees and everything. So it's very much kind of grounded in Irish folklore. And then with the Lost Island, you see that it incorporates the legend of Manannán Mac Lir, who was the Irish the god of the sea. So
yes,
possibly more in her children's fiction, kind of magic and mysticism was brought in.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I'm conscious of our time now, so I'm going to, I suppose, wrap it up with two final questions just on that subject of the sea. Dillon has such a wonderful ability for maritime description, doesn't she? When she's talking about the white points and the waves, and I mean, it's almost palpable, you know, the salty air, and it just transports you away. And I suppose that trope of the island is so profound in her work. Could you comment on that trope of the island? I mean, is there a sense that it's almost like an externalization of an inner turmoil or a challenge that a child is working out? This metaphor of the island, that they can go to this island and they can work through you know, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that image of the island that features so much in her work. That they can find the strength, the inner resources.
Yeah, and the community strength of the island, because I think a lot of kind of island fiction, especially, you know, British children's fiction that has like, it features an island, think of like, you know, Swallows and Amazons, or even Blyton's Kieran Island. It's a place where the children go for the adventure, but with Dillon's work, the island is the home of the protagonists, and it's where they learn of the customs, and they have a kind of a strong sense of community. And some scholars have also argued that it's like the islands that feature in Dillon's work, that they are metaphors for Ireland, that the islanders' community is a sort of like a microcosm of the larger Irish community. And then with the idea, like say, of the island trope specifically in, you know, children's and the children's book and the young adults books, that kind of the sense of like being cut off and being restricted, I think is kind of like a very, you know, very powerful metaphor being used by the island, and the outwards journeys that are featured in the children's books, I think reflect that teenage longing, especially to kind of like go beyond your own home, to expand your horizons and to see more of the world and observe and maybe be part of a wider society.
Yes, indeed, that's a lovely observation. Lovely. There's a lot to unpack there. Thanks very much, Siobhán. Just a final question for you, a general one. What do you think, in your opinion, is her most notable contribution to Irish children's literature? I suppose, you know, the stories are kind of classic stories, adventure stories, and they're timeless. Perhaps the writing is of its time too. You know, would a child nowadays get all the references and understand that kind of discourse, that way of writing? There's so many appealing elements to the stories. So I'm just wondering, taking them as a whole, what you think her most notable contribution is to children's literature in Ireland.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to think about kind of like, you know, what is her current status within, you know, 21st century children's literature in Ireland. But I think, you know, within the 20th century, she was fundamental in kind of creating this native canon of Irish children's literature, with kind of like Patricia Lynch around the same time, because during, you know, mid 20th century, a lot of Irish readers would have relied on imported fiction from, you know, Britain and America. So she wrote books that, you know, were very much based in Ireland, with Irish protagonists that reflected Irish customs, their religion, their language and folklore. So I think she did so much to kind of like develop the whole literary genre in Ireland at the time. And then nowadays, yeah, like the language, it might kind of seem a little bit dated for, you know, modern readers now, but I think her books could be kind of used now more like for educational value. I mean, like you learn so much about early 20th century Ireland through reading her books, and I think you learn so much as well about Irish folklore and Irish myth. So a child reading now who may not have ever heard of, you know, Selkies or the myth of Manannán, they will learn this through reading her books. So maybe that, you know, kind of like as a modern value of her books. But I think her main contribution was in the 20th century in developing the genre in Ireland.
Yes, indeed. At a time when there was a paucity of literature for children, after, with the wars breaking out, I suppose, just when it was starting to take off, and then there was a big gap in the development of children's literature until Eilís Dillon, I suppose. And I suppose just a final thought, with Christmas looming and with the young people in our family, our nieces and nephews and etc., would you have any suggestions? I know a few of them have been reissued, such as the New York Review of Books reissued the Island of Horses and the Lost Island, and they're quite readily available, aren't they? Would you have any recommendations for the younger people with Christmas coming up?
I would, well, because I love folklore so much, so I would recommend The Lost Island, but also A Family of Foxes. I think that's a wonderful
Emily,
book.
Can I just comment on something there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, through the library service, school's library service, we're doing A Family of Foxes and Island of Horses with the Aran Islands, Inishboffin and Weenish. And Inishman have already come back and said they have enjoyed a family of foxes so much that they want to read The Island of Horses next.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Hats off to you. That's great. That's fantastic.
It's great. So they're still, you know, obviously children still love them as much as
still as appealing, as perennially popular as ever. That's wonderful, and another great note to end this evening's session on. Thank you so much to you all for participating, and thanks so much to our special guest for sharing those fantastic insights. There's lots to think about and mull over, so thank you so much, Siobhán. Yes, Bula Boss there. I can see people are clapping. Yeah. Thank you so much. And next week we will be delighted to have Maureen O'Connor from UCC with us. Maureen is an expert on 20th century Irish women's fiction, and I suppose Edna O'Brien would be one of her areas of specialty as well. And so she is going to discuss the comparative context, and we're going to look again at her reputation and her legacy. And I look forward to you all joining us then for the final session next week. So take care, look after yourselves, stay safe. Agus slán go fólín.
Thank you. Thank you. Agus go maith agus.
Fáilte is fithe. Slán inis.